We are at an especially critical time in human history. The whole overreaction of Israel to the October 7th attack is a deliberate plan to start a nuclear war to destroy Iran. The Russians have hypersonic missiles, and they could sink any of the American aircraft carriers in about 5 minutes. I am scared because of the number of countries involved. Would they consider a false flag operation? I'd say absolutely. We could be in World War III in short order. Inflation's going to go a lot higher. Credit card interest rates are the highest they've ever been. Defaults on subprime auto loans are the highest they've ever been. The banking system is waiting for a 10-knot breeze to blow them over. I hope we have the financial collapse first, and we realize we cannot afford this stupidity. You're not dealing with brain surgeons, you're dealing with idiots. If there was ever a time to prepare for the future, it would certainly be now.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back again with our distinguished guest, Bob Moriarty. He's an American Marine F-4B pilot who holds the record as the youngest naval aviator at the age of 20 in the Vietnam War, achieving the rank of captain in the Marines at the age of 22. Before leaving military service in 1970, he did 824 combat missions. He's widely known today as a very prudent financial analyst and market forecaster, if you will. And it's a pleasure to have you on again today, Bob, because we just want to know what the hell is going on with this economy. What is your take on the geopolitical situation around the world? I want to hear your worst case, your best case, your middle of the road case, and how are you doing today in response to everything that's going on?
I'm doing okay, and strange enough, we should start by me explaining my military background. I went into the Marine Corps a week after I turned 18. I enlisted. I went through boot camp. I was high shooter at the rifle range. I was platoon honor man. And that was a month after the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So the Marine Corps knew we were going to go to war, and they were looking for pilots. So I'm the youngest naval aviator in Vietnam, not because I'm special. I just started earlier. I controlled hundreds, maybe as many as 1,000 airstrikes, hundreds of artillery missions, dozens of naval gunfire missions. So to say I'm one of the most experienced target selectors in Marine Corps history would be very accurate, okay? And that's especially important now, trying to figure out what's going on. So let's take one thing at a time. Ukraine. The United States sponsored a $5 billion coup d'etat in 2014. It has been the intention of the United States since 1945 to try to pull the rug out from underneath the USSR or Russia. So there was a coup d'etat, and the easternmost provinces of Ukraine voted in a fair election about 96% to join Russia. Russia said, no, you're part of Ukraine and you're not going to join us. But Western Ukraine attacked Eastern Ukraine. And then in 2019, the US DOD paid the RAND Corporation millions of dollars to do a study into how to get Russia to attack Ukraine. So this idea that Russia unprovoked went in and attacked Ukraine is absolute rubbish. The war was fought by and for the United States against Russia. And some of the people, like Chuck Schumer, says that the few $1 billion that it cost was very cheap to hurt Russia. I know that neocons hate Russia, want to destroy Russia, but I don't see that as improving the world. So in February of last year, after Ukraine had put 150,000 troops on the border with Donetsk and said they wanted nuclear weapons, those, of course, are red lines. And Putin had said, if you do this, if you try to apply for NATO, we will attack you. And Putin did exactly what he said he was going to do and what he was legally justified in doing. The attacks on Donetsk had killed 14,000 Russian-speaking, Russian heritage citizens by Ukraine in spite of an agreement called the Minsk II agreement in 2016. So where do we stand now? Ukraine lost the war in March of 2022, and Turkey got Ukraine and Russia to sit down and talk about a peace treaty. And they had actually initialed an agreement to return to the borders of February 2022. The UK sent Boris Johnson over there at the request of the United States to tell Zelensky he could keep stealing as long as he would keep pouring the blood of his young men into the battle. It has destroyed an entire generation of Ukrainians and pretty much destroyed the economy of the country. There was no purpose to it whatsoever except to do damage to Russia. And in my opinion, that's an evil thing to do. But let's go back to selecting military targets, which I am very good at. The Russians have hypersonic missiles with 1,000-kilometer range that they can operate off of Su-51s in the Black Sea, and they could sink any of the American aircraft carriers in about 5 minutes. You cannot defend against these missiles. A week ago, the Ukrainians reported losing 24 aircraft in 1 week with no warning whatsoever from air-to-air missiles that had been fired from 250 kilometers away. For them to be firing undetectable air-to-air missiles from 250 kilometers away is remarkable. We have nothing to compare to that. Now let's talk about good guys and bad guys in war. That has nothing to do with anything. What has to do with anything is how good your weapons are and how many you've got. When the Germans sent over their very best tanks, the Russians went in and they were taking out $20 million tanks with $5,000 suicide drones. Now, war is a function of economics, and you can only continue the war as long as you've got people and you've got money to pay for the weapons. And quite bluntly, Ukraine's run out of people and they've run out of money. And now we've got into the silly contest with Zelensky. He keeps talking about winning the war. You don't win a war when you just killed 40% of your young men, okay? The war is over in Ukraine, and Europe has begun to wake up to the fact that it was very expensive and it was fought for no purpose. So I think we could pretty much take Ukraine off the board. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer. But that war is over. And since the United States did such a great job in Afghanistan and such a great job in Ukraine, they've decided to come up with an entirely new war in the Middle East.
Yeah, it seems as though now, last I heard, there's 3 aircraft carriers, all of European origin, entering the Baltic, and now the talk is about fortifying the Baltics. Today, Finland has announced that they've closed most of the checkpoints with Russia, and it appears already that the Germans have already pulled their Patriot missile defense systems from Poland. And so we're seeing a lot of repositioning of forces in anticipation, perhaps, of some sort of breakdown in the Ukrainian military. And now it appears as though they're getting ready to have some sort of engagement with the Russians in the Baltic, or even Denmark is talking about putting some sort of oil embargo on Russia, which seems like suicide, for them. I mean, if it is truly collapsing for the Ukrainians, they must have known that this was going to be the outcome. Is there possibly some 4D chess move going on here? Do they have another trick up their sleeve with Ukraine? Do you think it's completely 100% over for Ukraine?
Europe has been a lapdog for the United States since February of 2022. I wrote a piece in early March of 2022, and I said that sanctions on Russia were suicide for the EU, for the NATO, and for the US and the US dollar. And I'm still absolutely convinced that was true. It was economic suicide, okay? The economic driver for the EU is Germany. And a report just came out saying 67% of German industry companies have had to move operations outside of Europe because they can't afford the energy. So what the Europeans did was just stupid beyond belief. NATO and the United States have demonstrated they are a paper tiger. And in fact, that's exactly what the situation is in Ukraine. Some of the stuff gets stupid. The United States was behind the attack on Nord Stream. That was a $30 billion act of terrorism that the Chancellor of Germany actually approved the United States doing. And I know the United States military did it because they only knocked out 3 of the 4 targets. We have destroyed our military in the United States, period. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the average soldier, but at the very top, you've got these glory-seeking buffoons with 40 medals on their chests that they got for attendance. Now, I am not a pacifist. I am exactly the opposite of a pacifist. I just hate war because I've been there. But I was right on the cutting edge, and I've got a real good idea of what it takes to actually fight a war. And there's nobody on active duty above the rank of full bird colonel who has any clue today. Now, you raised a really important question, and it goes to the heart of what's going on in Gaza right now. If you define the problem in Gaza as being 30,000 terrorists who are embedded in 2.3 million civilians, how do you get rid of them if your weapon is a aircraft carrier? How do you separate the terrorists from the civilians with an aircraft carrier?
Well, I don't think you can.
Thank you. Okay, it is that simple. Okay, now if, again, your target is 30,000 terrorists and 2.3 million people in Gaza, how does a nuclear-armed submarine end the conflict?
Yeah, I think I see where you're going with this line of thinking.
Okay. To the extent that there are more warships in the Baltic and the Mediterranean than there have been since 1945, you have to ask the question, what are the intentions, okay, of the United States and NATO? And I'll be candid, and I said this a month ago, the whole Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th stinks. Okay. There is no way in hell that Israel and the United States didn't know what was going on, or we are led by true buffoons who have no clue whatsoever. So you've got Joe Biden, who is going to face criminal charges at some point, and he knows it. And you've got Bibi Netanyahu, who's going to face criminal charges at some point, and he knows it. Both of these guys have a vested interest in a wag the dog solution. What they're doing in Gaza is clearly a war crime. I accept that there are certain things that appear to be war crimes that were committed by Hamas, but this collective punishment against millions of helpless and hopeless Arabs and Christians, there's something wrong with that. But so the issue has to be, what exactly is the objective? And when you brought up those 3 European carriers, there's actually, I think there's 4 U.S. carriers over there, and there's 4 helicopter carriers over there. And the U.S. has made it clear there's 1 atomic submarine. I think the target, and I think this has been true right from the beginning or before, I think the target is Lebanon first, Syria second, and Iran third. Now, do you remember Wesley Clark and the 7 countries in 5 years?
Yes, okay. I do. I remember that press conference or whatever it was. Yes, I'm familiar. He said
it wasn't a press conference. It was an interview.
Right.
After 9/11, General Wesley Clark went to see some of his buddies at the Pentagon, and one of the guys came up to him and says, "General, you're not going to believe this, but we're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to attack Lebanon. We're going to attack Libya. We're going to attack Sudan. We're going to attack Somalia. We're going to attack Syria. We're going to attack Iraq, and we're going to attack Iran." And Wesley Clark said, "What?" Now, strangely enough, and again, this is a trick question, how is Syria the enemy of the United States?
Yeah, I mean, some people might say they're a crossroads into Europe. Maybe there's a Russian military presence there, but I'll let you provide your explanation.
What makes them the enemy? They didn't do anything to us. Iran didn't do anything to us. We keep talking about Hamas as if Iran is pulling strings, and Iran wasn't pulling strings, and we know that as intelligence people. I'm very strong believer that the target is Lebanon first, Syria second. Syria is not the enemy of the United States. The United States invaded a country that had a democratically elected leader that had done nothing to the United States. We are occupying parts of Syria. We are stealing their oil. And we have no right whatsoever to do that. Now, of the 7 countries, I don't think any of them were the enemy of the United States. If you go back to the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction, do you realize they're still looking for those weapons? They've never found them.
Yeah, and there seems to be a lot of leading indicators that would suggest that, that the speed at which they were able to deploy these aircraft carriers, the swiftness with which they jumped into action in that scenario and not in the Ukraine scenario is quite telling. That they obviously, in the very least, had a broader plan for the Middle East in the cards, and maybe they were, in the best case scenario, you could say, well, maybe they were just waiting for a situation like this to arise to exploit. I suppose in the most Machiavellian explanation would be that they, in some way, let this happen, or maybe even directed it to some extent. I try to be a little careful when I'm engaging in that sort of speculation, but where do you see this? What do you think the next play is going to be here, knowing that we have the largest amassing of warships ever in that region? What are they waiting for now, especially now that Hezbollah and Iran have not appeared to take the bait?
A funny thing you mentioned that, because you just hit the nail on the head. What I was talking about, when you're doing planning for combat, your opponent is doing exactly the same thing. I believe that the United States and the IDF believed that they could commit so many crimes in Gaza that the Arab world would react in a fury and fall into the trap. And I suspect the United States and Israel has fallen into a trap. And I think the long-term ramifications are very important. Now we're talking about Iran, and we're talking about Syria, we're talking about Lebanon. Who's the real target?
Well, I think ultimately the main center of influence in that region would probably be Iran.
It would be, but who's the real target? Okay, somebody sat down and said, "Okay, we need to start a war." Who are they at war with?
I don't know. What is your
Russia?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, Russia has military bases in Syria. Russia was the country that booted the hell out of ISIS in Syria. I think this is a global conflict. It's a conflict between the debt-based system of the West and the resource-based system of the BRICS. While the neocons in Washington, who are really the evil force behind the United States, while they're making all their plans, the Iranians and Hezbollah and the Russians are looking at this and say, we're not going to fall into the trap.
How do they, now that they've assembled and amassed all these warships, are they just going to turn them around? Are they just going to say, okay, well, they're not taking the bait, and we're going to have to go, maybe they'll move them all to Taiwan? What do you think the next move here is? Has the situation been alleviated by virtue of the fact that the Middle Eastern countries haven't taken the bait, or do you think that the neocons are going to try to provoke another response, or perhaps do a false flag?
I do, I think, agree with you that certainly Syria and Hezbollah and Iran have not taken the bait, and I'm glad that's true, because we could be in World War III in short order. But never confuse the ability of the neocons and the CIA and the FBI to do something really stupid and destructive to the United States.
And why would they do this, though? Like, what is their, aside war profiteering and whatever other, what could their motive possibly be to get us into a war in the Middle East?
Are you kidding? What did Eisenhower warn us about? What did MacArthur warn us about? This whole thing, I was in the military, okay? I went in when I was 18 years old. I got commissioned when I was 20 years old. I was in combat when I was 22. I believed all the bullshit. The military-industrial complex runs the United States. We either start World War III, or we somehow manage to avoid World War III. I actually hope we have the financial collapse, which a lot of people smarter than me have been predicting for years. I hope we have the financial collapse first, and we realize we cannot afford this stupidity. All this money that Biden and the Democrats are spending, somebody's got to come up with it. I hope we have an economic collapse, because that's a whole lot better than World War III. But given my experience with military equipment and targeting and real world combat experience, if we get into a war with BRICS, we're going to lose.
You're hoping that the market crash comes before the war, and you think that would be enough to prevent us from going over that cliff?
Yes.
Okay. And so you don't think they would utilize that as an excuse to, because I'm just thinking historically, you had the Great Depression that preceded the war in 1939. Like, do we run the risk of you could have both of those things be true, where you have a market crash, but they utilize the austere situations to rally the people for conflict, or they try to scapegoat somebody for the crisis, the financial crisis. They try to blame it on the Russians. They blame it on whoever. I could actually see a scenario where maybe both of these things happen. But how would
that's very valid, but you need to understand something. We're not dealing with brain surgeons. These guys don't plan anything. All they do is react. I'm so disappointed in the CIA, because these chicken shit little attacks are just ludicrous. And we're paying guys millions of dollars to come up with these really bright ideas. The CIA has been behind every war the United States has gotten into since 1945. And it's just, you're not dealing with brain surgeons, you're dealing with idiots. I mean, tell me that Biden could read a whole paragraph without screwing it up. He just had a meeting with the head of China and called him a dictator to his face. Excuse me, Joe, you might want to not mention that in this particular press conference. We're actually trying to get along with the Chinese today. Call him a dictator tomorrow. We got a president of the United States who sits down for a diplomatic meeting to one of the most important countries in the world and called him a dictator. Excuse me, Joe, you're a dictator.
Yeah, what's your take on how China factors into all of this? Why do you think China is meeting with Biden now?
It's to their advantage to do so, and I fully approve of that. You need to talk to the people rather than define people as the enemy, which it's never productive. You need to sit down and talk to them.
What is your take on the current situation with the markets with respect to, why is the price of oil so low in spite of all the potential for Middle East calamity?
Strange enough, and that's a really good question, there is an obvious disconnect between the potential risk and what the cost would be. If the Arabs want to hold the 1973 Arab oil embargo, which would be perfectly legal for them to do. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to attack them because they don't want to sell oil to you? You could see oil went from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel literally overnight in 1973. And that would take it from $76 a barrel to $310 a barrel literally overnight now. And they haven't done that. Gold hasn't particularly responded. The price of oil right now is low and has gone down because of decreased demand. So economics is still running the price of energy, but are there very real geopolitical risks. And I think that anybody who doesn't recognize how dangerous the world is right now, we have idiots, okay, running all these countries, taking their little toy boats and floating them in the Baltic or floating them in the Mediterranean. If I was on one of those aircraft carriers in the Eastern Mediterranean and I read about this missile, hypersonic missile that had 1,000 kilometers range, do you know what I would be doing 16 hours a day?
Learning how to swim.
Nah, I'd be praying. Okay. Oh, please, God, Buddha, anybody, Jesus, please. The weapons the Russians have are absolutely terrifying. And the lack of weapons and the lack of leadership that the United States has absolutely has to be terrifying. The degree to which everything we're being told now is a lie, that's pretty scary. We're in Never Never Land, run by idiots who are totally unqualified for the benefit of the military-industrial complex. And would these people blow up the world so they can make more money? Well, yeah, they probably would.
So you think that the price of oil being low is mostly dictated by lack of demand, then that they haven't really priced in any potential chaos. There must be somebody on Wall Street, though, who can see the U.S. amassing this large fleet of warships in the Middle East and anticipating, you would think anyways, that these hedge funds or whoever's moving the money would see that there is a potential for conflict and would be pricing some of that in.
Yes, and you would be correct. And I can't point to who it was, but I did read something in the last week where one of the really, the top 10 heavy hitters came out and said it would be entirely appropriate to have some kind of bet on energy because the risks are so high. And the risks are literally, World War III kind of risks. And I'm not saying because I believe something that I'm correct, but I believe the whole overreaction of Israel to the October 7th attack is a deliberate plan to start a nuclear war to destroy Iran. Let me point something out, okay? And I'm the only guy that ever brings this up. Does Iran have a nuclear weapons program?
I've heard all kinds of mixed opinions about that. What do you think?
Who cares what I think? There are 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, and twice under the Bush administration, they came to the conclusion, all 18 intelligence agencies, that there was no Iranian nuclear weapons program. Now, Bibi Netanyahu's been saying for 28 years that Iran is a year or two away from nuclear weapons. It's bullshit. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. It wouldn't make any sense for them to have a nuclear weapons program. If things get hot and hairy, believe me, Russia or China or Pakistan would supply them with nuclear weapons. There is no incentive whatsoever for Iran to have a nuclear weapons program. However, it gives Israel an excuse to commit more war crimes.
They're not taking the bait, so that means that the only possible move they have, if they want to go through with this plan to destroy these countries, would be some sort of false flag attack. And we get into the realm of speculation here, but and I guess we've already kind of covered this a bit, but is there anything more tangible that you see happening in the immediate future that could kick that off?
That's the way you presented that was very good. That's a really good question. here's what you've got. You've got so many competing players and so many competing points of view that saying this is going to happen would be a really foolish exercise. I am scared literally because of the number of vessels and the number of countries involved and the conflicting points of view. Would they consider a false flag operation? I'd say absolutely. Would the CIA contribute chicken shit little tactical attacks? Yeah, they go for it heartbeat. I can't say that with an 80% probability, but 10 or 20 or 30% would be probably a good number.
Have you heard about the story about the record number of super tankers currently headed to the U.S.? Apparently, according to Bloomberg, 50 oil tankers, super tankers on empty, are headed to the U.S. to kind of oil up and take that oil, I presume, maybe to Europe or someplace. Have you heard about that story?
I have not, and that's certainly an interesting story. So you're saying empty ships are coming to the United States?
Yeah, it was a Bloomberg article just put out in the last few days. Numerous other places have reported on it, but apparently this is a record level of super tanker, super tankers, like big ships that carry oil. Right. Yeah, and apparently this is a record amount of these, and which is, interesting in light of the fact that obviously our strategic oil reserve has been diminished a lot. And where are they getting this oil from, I guess? Is this, I wasn't sure if you were aware of this, but is this factoring into the oil price at all? And maybe the plan is to deplete this strategic oil reserve even more?
They could deplete it in a week. And I don't think so. I don't think they would bring the oil companies into the equation. But why they would bring empty tankers to the United States? If you want unlimited oil at a good price, you don't go to the United States, you go to India.
Yeah, so it's definitely strange, something to look into anyways. What do you think about oil embargo against Israel? Do you think that will ever take shape with the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab countries? Do you think?
I'm surprised it hasn't taken place already.
Yeah.
Okay. At some point in time, economics does have to factor into everything that you do. And it would be perfectly legal. You can always tell somebody, hey, we're not going to sell oil to you. One of the things we haven't even mentioned, are you aware there's a big gas and oil field offshore from Gaza?
I am aware. I've heard it talked up quite a bit. I don't know how much stock I put in the idea just because I don't know if the juice is necessarily worth the squeeze. Like, I'm sure it's profitable, but I just don't know if it's the primary motive for doing all of this.
I don't think it's a primary motive, but it's a potential motive. Are you familiar with the Ben Gurion waterway?
Was it supposed to be an alternative to the Suez Canal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that would start either in Gaza or near Gaza and go to the Gulf of Aqaba. And it would give Israel enormous power. And actually, the thing that I read today that was interesting to me was that it would only be like a $25 billion to $50 billion project. And for governments, that's not a lot of money. So there, again, and this goes back to there's so many competing points of view that predicting the future is exceptionally difficult to do. I know that what Israel is doing in Gaza is incredibly stupid, because if you've ever read anything about the battles in Stalingrad in World War II, the last thing you want is a bunch of knocked over buildings that people can hide in and snipe at you. I think the Israelis, IDF, are suffering a lot more losses than they're admitting to.
Yeah, and in addition to that Ben Gurion canal, I think there's also a pipeline that they were considering building that kind of runs
Right,
along.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's definitely some ulterior motives there for sure. Well, moving, I guess, the conversation more towards the realm of economics. Obviously, you have a lot of great economic insights. Your website, 321gold.com, provides a wealth of information with respect to trend forecasting and finance. What is your prediction in the next 6 months with respect to the economy? Or can we look at a markets going up, down? Are we looking at more bank crises? What the price of gold is going to be? Maybe just give us your overview of the next 6 months and what that might look like for global markets.
Again, because there are so many factors at play, it's very hard to say. But let me give you some numbers. Credit card interest rates are the highest they've ever been at 29%. Defaults on subprime auto loans are the highest they've ever been at about 7%. The banking system is waiting for a 10-knot breeze to blow them over. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the concept of entropy, but entropy is the concept that in physics, as time passes, chaos, you get more and more chaos. A spinning top is a perfect example of entropy. And just before it crashes, it starts getting really wobbly. Our financial system is so distorted today that it wouldn't take very much for it to collapse. And that's why I'm so concerned about the geopolitical thing, because, my God, an Arab oil embargo would do it, blowing up Iranian oil fields would do it, running the strategic oil reserve to zero would do it. The banks are especially, they're insolvent. Okay. Peter Schiff did a piece this week, and he was talking about banks are not only losing money on the mortgages that are not getting paid, they're losing money on every single mortgage payment that does get paid, because they were loaning money at 3%, and they're paying 6% today. Lowering interest rates to the degree to which they did was incredibly foolish. And for the banks to not hedge their positions was even more foolish. There was one tiny bank in the Midwest somewhere that went down a couple of weeks ago, but we have the entire banking system is underwater. And sooner or later, you can ignore reality, but reality isn't going to ignore you.
What about inflation? What is your predictions on inflation?
Inflation's going to go a lot higher. Even the Federal Reserve admitted that interest rates were going to go up higher, and they would go up longer than they had forecast. I lived in the inflation of the 70s and 80s, and everything that we had then, we have now. Fiat currencies always collapse in the end, and I see hyperinflation coming.
So how come we haven't seen it really go parabolic yet? Because it appears as though, I mean, it could be the suppressed oil prices, it could be a variety of things, but it appears that the inflation is, well, if depending on how you measure it, and I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here, emphasis on the devil, it appears as though inflation is down from the highs that we've seen in 2022. So, what are they doing to kind of curtail it, or at least paper over it? And why haven't we seen it spike yet?
You just hit the key word.
What would that be?
Yet.
Yet.
It's absolutely accurate to say inflation is down from 2022. However, basic interest rates are higher, which makes everything more expensive. I don't know if you've tracked it, but the student loans, it was required that the student loans started getting paid in October. Okay. So there's a lot of money being sucked out of the system. Demand is going down for a lot of things and prices going up. Inflation, I don't know what a good analogy is. Inflation is like herpes. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And I see inflation getting worse.
What about the age-old question that people love to ask you, gold prices and precious metals prices, commodities prices? What do you think? What are your 6-month prognostications on gold price?
I'm not smart enough to say that. In one of my books, I've got a chapter devoted 10 years ago, or so, more than that, 12 years ago. Somebody called me up and said, look, we have called every expert in the gold area and gotten their forecast of where gold will be a year from now. What's your forecast? And I said, I can't forecast it. I'm not smart enough to forecast it. Whoever forecasts is going to be wrong. And I think there were 219 people they asked the question of, and they published the results for 218. And I was the one person who said, I'm not smart enough to figure that out. Here's the key that nobody ever talks about, and they should. When you're talking about the price of gold, you're talking about two commodities. What are they?
Gold.
And?
Silver, I presume.
No. What do you price gold in?
Well, U.S. dollars, typically.
Thank you. So when you're talking about gold, you're talking about two commodities. You're talking about the U.S. dollar and you're talking about gold. From a historical point of view, gold is actually fairly priced today or higher than it should be. If you go back to 1900 and you look at the price of automobiles or houses or loaves of bread or postage stamps, you realize that gold and silver are actually quite high. There's a charting service that I follow that tracks 8 different metals. And you go back to 1900 and virtually every time frame, gold and silver have gone up more than aluminum, copper, nickel, zinc, lead. And the gold bugs, and I'm not a gold bug, okay? The gold bugs want to think that it's been suppressed. And they would argue that silver was suppressed from $4 to 50. And I would maintain that if you believe silver was suppressed from $4 to 50, you need new batteries for your calculator. The guys who invented the whole silver and gold suppression things were two of the biggest con men in commodity history, okay? Are silver and gold manipulated? Well, interest rates are manipulated. Currencies are manipulated. Stock markets are manipulated. Are gold and silver manipulated? Of course there are. All financial markets are manipulated, but it's no big deal. We know the government's screwing around with the interest rates all the time. We don't even take it into the equation because we know they're going to manipulate it. So there's a lot of things that investors look at that are true, but they're meaningless. And that is the measure of a con man. When a person wants to con you, he tells you something that's true, but it's meaningless at the same time. Yes, manipulation exists. Yes, banks have been fined millions of dollars for manipulated silver and gold, but they were manipulating 2 or 3 cents at a time. The idea that it's significant is absolutely not true. There is a difference between signal and noise. And if you remember listening to old time radios, you heard a lot of noise and very little signal. Automobiles today, I mean, the signal of audio is absolutely incredible to me, but signal is important and noise is not important. Investors have to learn the difference between signal and noise. If the US dollar collapses, what's going to happen to the price of gold? And the price of gold is obviously going to go up in US dollars. I don't see the US dollar being a long-term investment. Certainly it's a medium-term investment because it's the world's reserve currency. It will tend to be strong, but long-term, all fiat currencies collapse. I view silver and gold as insurance policies. A lot of people talk about them being money. I believe they will be money once again. I mean, that's a way to cure the economy literally overnight. In 1789, there was a revolution in France, and it was caused by the Louis XV getting involved in the American Revolutionary War. And that bankrupted France, fighting a war that they didn't have to fight. So by 1789, the peasants in the city of Paris couldn't afford wheat. So they revolted, and the revolution started with 35,000 oligarchs in the royalty, and it ended with 3,500. And there was a French colonel, okay, who took over the country and killed a bunch of people, okay, who were fighting him. And the first thing he did is go back to gold and silver. Remember who that colonel's name was?
I'm not familiar, no.
That would be Napoleon. And the amazing thing was his cure for the economy, and it literally worked overnight, was to go back to gold and silver. I absolutely believe we will go back to gold and silver. We're not going to go back to gold and silver because anybody wants to. Everybody's going to fight it tooth and nail. We're going to go back to it because currencies are going to go into a free fall, and people aren't going to be afford wheat, and they'll revolt.
And so what sort of black swan event might kick off the dollar depreciation, the rapid dollar depreciation?
Too many. There literally are too many. I could give you 100, and it was still, I would still be missing 90% of them. There are so many black swans flying around that it looks like midnight. And one of those black swans is going to take a crap, and it's going to land right on our head.
Could you maybe just give us a few like examples of what those things might be for my viewers who maybe aren't as well versed in macroeconomics?
Okay. The banking system writing off their bad loans, and the economy realizing that they're functionally bankrupt. Interest rates at 7 or 8%, inflation at 15 to 20%, an Arab oil embargo, a nuclear attack on Iran's oil fields. There's just literally, there's so many variables, there's so many things that can happen. It's very easy to predict what will happen. What's hard to predict is how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. We just know it's going to happen. The United States increased the debt $600 billion in 1 month.
Yeah, $600 billion in a month is completely unsustainable, especially if that is going to be continuing to increase month over month.
Well, here's what's scary. It doesn't have to increase, but $600 billion a month annualized over 12 months is $7.2 trillion. So what I'm trying to get at is the government is literally out of control. And I'll give you another number, and this is a cause or the cause for most of the conflict in the world. The United States and Israel have created 37 million refugees since 9/11.
Yeah, it's causing a lot of instability. Speaking of instability, in terms of your political predictions for 2024, obviously a lot of what's going on right now can factor into the outcome of the presidential race. What do you think we can look forward to in 2024 in the American political sphere?
I agree with McGregor.
What does he say?
He says he doesn't think there'll be an election.
So you think that there'll be a war and we won't, they'll call the election off? Is that even like possible in the US?
Sure. I mean, I've seen so many things happen in the last couple of years that I would have never believed possible before, that there literally is no limit to the stupidity of the people who have the reins of power today. But Zelensky refuses to hold elections in Ukraine. They had elections in the eastern Ukraine, internationally supervised elections, and people were voting who were less than 10 miles from the front lines. So the only people who are afraid of elections are the crooks.
Doesn't bode well for the future, does it? It seems as though maybe if we can end on more of a positive note, what is your best case prediction here in light of everything that we've talked about, to give people a little bit of hope perhaps? What is the best possible outcome of these predicaments we find ourselves in?
There are two possible outcomes. One possible outcome is the same thing that has happened every time for 5,000 years when there's chaos, is you somehow make it through. And in that case, we'll be fine. And the other alternative is we have World War III, and if you have World War III, you don't give a shit anymore.
Well, let's hope that there's still somebody in the upper echelons who is not reacting but responding to these events as they unfold. And let's hope that they do have a game plan and they're not going to bring us to the brink. I think everybody would agree that, we would prefer to live in an austere world instead of one that was scorched earth and Mad Max. So let's hope that they, in the very least, can pull us back from the brink. But where can people find out? Do you have a YouTube channel yet, or are you just still mostly posting on 321gold.com?
I don't, because I'm too old and too lazy. I don't need the money.
I think it's more too lazy, not too old. Nobody's ever too old.
I'm definitely too lazy. I mean, thank you for giving me credit for that. I don't need the money. I don't need the aggravation, and it's too much like hard work. I genuinely enjoy doing interviews with you and with a few other people and trying to help people. And what your viewers should understand, I don't get anything out of this. It doesn't make any difference to me. I don't get any money. I'm not running for political office. I get to look at myself in the mirror every day. I don't have to go to YouTube to look at myself. However, we are at an especially critical time in human history, and it is incumbent on all of us to contribute what we can to make a better world rather than a more chaotic world. Most people, 70-80% of people, are just stumbling through lives. They're believing all the lies they've been told, and they're hoping for the best. And that's not what we need. We need some real leadership. And I'll be candid. You said you hoped that there would be somebody in the upper echelon. There is nobody in the upper echelon today. It is going to take a total crisis, chaos, before leadership starts floating to the top.
I hate to say it, but I actually have to agree. Like I say, I always try to play the devil's advocate, and I always try to, because we preppers, we often get accused of being overly pessimistic. So to try to balance it out, I'll sometimes maybe try to emphasize a little bit, anyways, the possibility that they do have a handle on things. But I have to agree with you that you're probably right. But I would encourage people to go and check out Bob's website, 321gold.com, and check out the multitude of other interviews that you've done in just the past month even. You've been making the rounds, and it's great to have your wisdom and insights into all these situations. So I appreciate you coming out today.
Well, I will make a slight pitch, even though I don't get anything out of it, because I gave the rights to my books away to some people who needed the money more than I did. I've written about 10 or 12 books, and I highly encourage people to at least take a look. If you will read the critical comments from people who have bought the books, my books tend to be very favorably responded to. And I've had 3 books actually make it to the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, which I'm quite pleased with.
Well, we will post links to those in the description below, as well as to your website. Thanks again for coming out, Bob. We greatly appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure, and I admire the work you are doing and have done. And if there was ever a time to prepare for the future, it would certainly be now.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.